Hello, this is JDM from the Inventables.com forums. I'm going to do a quick demo here and show you some problem solving with setting up inlays. This is a project that another user had posted and was having issues. And here, as I look and see on my preview, these red lines are indicating places that the 1/8 inch bit cannot cut into. So when the machine cuts that, it's just going to skip that, and you'll have a little bit more rounded corners. Um, the only way to effectively deal with that is to start dropping your bit size, and 1/16 gets most of them, not all of them, but most of them. This is just a limitation of the tool, and there's not much you can do about it. If your details are too fine, the machine is going to tell you that it's not able to cut them. So a couple ways to look at this particular project is, first, if I want to use the inlay application that is a plugin for Easel, I can do that. I'm not going to have as many options in setting up the rest of my project, but the purpose of this application is to help you set up an inlay very quickly with a minimal amount of figuring things out or layout. The options it gives you are specifically to avoid those areas where previously we had red marks that showed where the bit wouldn't reach. So your options here are to specify the bit size you want to use to cut and the tolerance that you want to give your inlay pieces, and that is going to adjust the size of those inlay pieces. This is a great way to do some simple inlays and get going right away. There's some pluses and minuses to it, and I'll show you that now. If I import based on that, what it is going to do is it's going to redraw. You can see it's redrawing these areas. Let's bring this over here. I can drag my set of inlay parts over, and I can look and see how they line up. And I can tell that I am not going to be satisfied with that. Now, if I wanted to set this up based on using the application, what it does when it brings in new geometries, it groups it. So if I try to select one of my pieces, it selects the entire object together. Now, that's good for a nice complex item, and specifically I would say when you have pieces that are very close together and their orientation is really set to where it's more convenient to cut it that way. In a case like this, I would manually set up this inlay. Once this piece is grouped, if I use the Exploder app on this to split that geometry into segments, we'll do that real quick and show you what happens to it. It may not be obvious right away what happened, but because these were isolated line segments that weren't overlapping or nested in any other shape, when Exploder brings them in, it actually brings the shape back one step. So if I zoom into this area, I can see that it broke my segment, and now it takes away my option to change it to an outline or back and forth from fill to outline or set cutting to the inside or on the path. Although I can select individual objects now. So that's not going to be a good solution for setting this up. But again, the Exploder app is meant to take a shape. Let me bring an icon in here, grab something that has multiple parts. Now, right away I know because of the size of this object that when I use the inlay app, it's going to have problems. And that's because of the size of the bit. So even if I start to bring that bit down, I'm getting more detail. I'm getting close, but I'm still not there because even this 1/32 bit is too large to get in between these shapes. So I can scale this up and give the shape more room to get in there as I bring this down. I'm starting to capture all the detail. I've got one little space here. So the inlay app is great for very specific circumstances. A lot of times you can manually do it just the same and get better results and faster. In particular on this bulldog, if I look at the shapes right now, they're filled and they would be cut as a pocket. So this is the orientation of the shapes I want to have the design turn out and look the way I want it to. When I get to actually cutting these pieces out, I like to, for one thing, I like to arrange my pieces very close together so that all this negative space isn't wasted. If I'm using an exotic veneer, I don't want all that extra wood just to be scrap. So many times I'll drag these around and I'll rotate them and I'll pack them in as close as I can for my inlay part. So while this is perfect for the pocket, you may wish to do other things for the inlay. And in a case like this, what I would do is I would copy this file. This position can be aligned to wherever I want it, and I'm going to set it up so it's close to my 0 point. But I'm going to make a copy of this file. And then I'm going to rename it to inlay. Essentially, I have a copy of the file, the same shapes in the same place. I can now, because they're all individual objects, their segments haven't been broken, I can select them all and set them to an outline. And because they're separate objects, they can each be set up with their own tab. So if you want to, for these smaller pieces, only have 2 tabs, you can do that. Tabs are resource heavy when you start getting a bunch. And then of course I can drag these around and pack them close together. Sometimes if I have a really complicated inlay, what I will do is take a screenshot or print out my original drawing on a piece of paper so that as I cut my pieces I can pull them off, I can lay them on the right spot and then tape them down so I keep everything nice and straight after they come off the machine. So that's just a method to deal with that. If I do want to stay with the inlay and let the app do its job, which is figuring out tolerances and based on the bit size, I can bring in new geometry. And what I will have to do, because this is grouped as one object, remember I don't want to use the exploder because I'll break my line segments and I'll lose my option. That's just the way that plugin works at the moment. Maybe in the future they'll update it, but that's the way it works now. So if I'm okay and I'm not worried about waste wood or these parts the way they're laid out, I can count my pieces and decide how many tabs I want and then start adding tabs. And then you'll manually have to go in there and drag your tabs. You can drag your tabs from one object across to another. and keep adding more as you need them. But the way I would do it is I would count all my pieces, decide if I wanted one or two tabs, and maybe add a few extra tabs for these larger pieces to support them. If I ended up in a situation where I had too many tabs, you can take a tab and drag it on top of another tab. And when it cuts, it will just act as one. So if you have any other questions, one other thing about and this is just the way I do inlays, and you don't have to do it that way, but I always cut my pocket first. So I'll put my material down that I'm going to inlay my parts into, and then I'm sorry, I'm telling you this in reverse. I made a mistake. I cut my parts first. So I would open my inlay file, and lay these out however I want them, get them set my bit size, cut them all out, and I would cut all my parts first and have those ready. Then second, I would cut my pocket and leave the workpiece on the machine as I test fit the inlay parts in there. And this, when you do inlays by hand, I used to do all my inlays with a jeweler's saw or a scroll saw, and then a small little router base for a Dremel tool, and route out the pieces by hand. So a lot of times you weren't anywhere near as accurate as what x-carve can do, and you would have to physically fit the piece in there and then maybe file or sand a little bit off an edge. But now my process for doing more complex inlays is to cut my pocket first, and then I have my inlay pieces laid out. I can come and test them. If I have an instance where the pocket is too tight, I will manually go over and I will just kind of lie to the machine. And if I have a 1/16 bit size, I'll tell it other, and then rather 0.0625, what I'll start doing is just a little bit at a time telling the machine, I might say 615, and just a little bit at a time tell the machine that my bit is smaller than it actually is, and then I won't run the whole file. I will just set all of this to inside, and I'll just have the machine make another pass, just barely taking a little bit off that edge. If I have to do it again, I'll go into my bit and I'll just take a little bit more off the bit. So by telling the machine the bit is smaller, it's going to nudge the instructions over just a little bit, so you'll just slowly shave that off. And I've found that to be an excellent way to do these inlays, so that really they come out perfect. So if you have any other questions on setting this up, please don't hesitate to send me a message. Again, my username on the forums is JDM, and thank you.